Hi everyone and welcome to episode 65 of the ITSM crowd. Today our topic is SIAM in 2020 and I'm joined by the lead architects of the SIAM Body of Knowledge refresh, Simon Dorst and Michelle Major-Goldsmith. We're going to be talking about why the refresh has taken place, who's been involved and what's changed, and we are able to answer your questions if you're watching this live as well. So if you do have any questions, you can use YouTube comments or you can post them on Twitter using the hashtag ITSM crowd, and we will pick those up during the broadcast. Equally, if you're watching this after it's gone out, then you can contact any of us via Twitter. So again, use the hashtag ITSM crowd, or you can contact us using our Twitter handles. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask our guests to introduce themselves. So Simon, please, if you could start.
Simon Dorst, work for Kinetic IT in Australia, doing all kinds of things, service management, mainly around ITIL and SIAM.
Thank you very much. And Michelle.
Oh, I don't think I have much to add. So Michelle Major-Goldsmith, Kinetic IT Australia, and doing the same sort of role as Simon does.
Thank you very much. And my name's Claire Agata. I'm going to be the host for today's session. So before we kind of kick into the refresh, just for anybody who's watching who's maybe not familiar with SIAM or not familiar with the bodies of knowledge and scopism, can you give us a little bit of background, please?
Yeah, sure. Look, SIAM stands for Service Integration and Management. It's the base principle that you normally have more than one provider doing something, and they all have to work together. And in these modern complex organizations we have, that's quite a big job. So roughly about 4 or 5 years ago, we realized that there was a big need to get some definition around this, and there wasn't. There were all kind of individual blogs and white papers out there about SIAM, service managers integration, and various other things. And hence the SIAM body of knowledge, or the foundation body of knowledge, was formed to bring some clarity in what to do and how to do this integration of multiple providers.
Thank you very much. Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
Just ready to follow on to say, after the foundation, then the professional guidance came along, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today, I'm sure. But that was very much about trying to put some more practical advice into the mix, so that practitioners of SIAM had a little bit more detail about the how do we manage the complexity.
Yeah, and there is, since then, Scopism, who produces and publishes the bodies of knowledge, has also partnered with some examination institutes. So you might have seen the foundation training that's available and the professional training, which again is bringing that kind of standardization into the SIAM world. So the standard terminology, common understanding, which is always one of the benefits you get with training of this type, particularly when you've got multiple organizations working together. So the body of knowledge refresh project kicked off last year, and Simon and Michelle, you very much took the lead on that and coordinated the group. Why was a refresh necessary?
Well, as I said, the SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge was written in, I think we started in 2015, published in 2016. So that is now 4 years ago, which is a long time in IT. So lots of other things have happened, things like ITIL 4, Verism, Agile and DevOps taking on different shapes outside of SIAM. But even SIAM itself has been shaping itself and carving out a position in the various markets around the world. So it really was time to go back to what we had written and to have a look at, okay, what is still relevant, but what can we add, or how can we put it in a more modern context?
Yeah, and I think to add to that, one of the things we were really keen to focus on was not to do change for change's sake. So key ethos behind the updates that we did was it something that was really going to deliver some value? Was it something that absolutely had to happen? And we were really fortunate to have the same group of people and others who knew a little bit more about, how we'd gone through the process and what the expectations were. So that really helped us to hone it quite nicely, which was what we wanted to do.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the people who were involved and how the project worked.
So the great thing about this is that all of the people involved are volunteers. They come from all over the world, and they're global practitioners for whatever reason, from different areas, different organizations, working with different types of customers. And one of the great things with having a global team, of course, is you can be quite agile in terms of how you do the work. So we split the team up so that we had various author teams for each of the sections we wanted to achieve. And then we had some reviewers as well that would review each section. So it was a case of sort of somebody would do some work overnight in one sort of continent, and then we would be able to pass it over to the others the next day. And so we could go around in these cycles, which was a fantastic way of doing it. So yeah, we've been really fortunate to have some of the most fantastic SIAM practitioners in the world help us with this. And we think the outputs have been really great as well as a result of that.
Simon, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's a great example of these day and age where people have different opinions around the world, different experiences, and it's a great group of people that were really willing to share their experiences in all kinds of shape. We had some interesting and robust discussions from time to time as well about different opinions, but at the end it's a real collaborative effort, and it's almost like one of the things we pride ourselves on. It's almost hard for someone to pick up the bits they've contributed because they've been used and reused and reshaped in there. So whilst there is the combined knowledge of 40 odd people in there, it's not one person who kind of has the main tone.
Yeah, and I think the unsung heroes of any project like this are the people who go through at the very end and check the grammar and the consistency of all the text, because it's only when I've worked on projects like this that I have realised just how terrible I am at grammar when somebody corrects what I've done. So there's people been involved from all over the world, and we've got two separate publications. We've got the foundation body of knowledge and then the professional body of knowledge. What are the key changes that have taken place in the professional body of knowledge, first of all, because that's kind of the more advanced publication?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one where there has been the biggest degree of change. But again, we were very much focused on making sure that the change was very necessary. It was already a massive book. So what we didn't want to do was make it even bigger. But we also don't want to throw people off and them thinking, okay, is there some significant change here? So the concepts, the ethos, the main principles haven't changed at all. But what we've done is we've incorporated a number of things that demonstrate the maturity in the SIAM environment. So one of the really interesting things was we looked at trust-based management. For managing suppliers, so that this wasn't a focus on just on contracts. We also looked at an area which I think is really important, which is around measuring the service integrator. So I think we were keen to incorporate things that we are asked about constantly. And that was one of the things quite often that people say, well, what would those metrics look like, and how do we actually measure the service integrator rather than just the service providers? Simon, do you want to add some?
Yeah, there are some great examples about non-conformant service providers, and that doesn't mean people who don't do what they say, but more the large commodity providers like cloud providers who don't really want to shape their delivery to your SIAM model, how to deal with them. There is some added text around non-contractual agreements, including collaboration agreements, which are very important because the contracts are kind of with the customer organization and not with the service integrator. So some good advice over there. Skills frameworks, there's a lot of development in there. So there's a new version of Sophia, but there's also a European capability framework and some other mentions in there, as well as some of the skills that have really surfaced over the last couple of years as being quite necessary in a SIAM environment. So there's some good practical guidance there. Certainly with the professional, we try to add things that show a practical side of how SIAM can look. And it may not be for everyone. It's clearly a reference book, but we do think it starts adding some real modern guidance for organizations.
Fantastic. And then the foundation publication is more about the sort of principles of SIAM and describing what SIAM is. Has there been any kind of fundamental change to the foundation body of knowledge?
No, there's absolutely not fundamental change. So, as I said, the principles remain the same. The basic structures and the theories around how to do or how to implement the role of a service integrator and the role of the customer and so on. But one of the things that we thought was really important was to try to, again, in response to questions we're asked a lot, try to incorporate a little bit more about how service integration can work in environments where things like agile principles are being used or DevOps exists and so on. And so that was one of the things we really focused on at the foundation level. The other key thing, I guess, was also to incorporate the fact that the service management landscape is changing. We've obviously seen new service management frameworks like Verism come in. We've seen ITIL 4 and the changes that have been made there. And I think Simon talked a little bit as well about the fact that some of the frameworks and the international standards were changing as well. So we wanted to make sure that we were up to date with that kind of stuff and incorporate those into the foundation level.
Yeah, sorry.
Go on, Simon, sorry.
We paid a lot of attention in the first writing of the foundation book to make sure people understood that SIAM isn't something that replaces any existing framework or methodology or practice. So we mentioned a number of them, and ITIL 3 became ITIL 4, COVID 5 became COVID 2019. So we just did an update in there, but I was actually very pleased to see that none of the basic concepts of SIAM really changed to a large degree. We just know more about it, but all the basic concepts in the foundation are still there. So it's a very light touch second edition. We kept saying that word from a foundation perspective. Agile, DevOps, and Lean are probably the most interesting one because we certainly have way more knowledge of how to apply that. So there is some further guidance in foundation, but for the professional, we actually added a whole appendix on some very specific methods and practices and techniques and how they can be used during the design, transition, and operation of a SIAM model in there, which was really interesting to work with those people. Some of them who kind of had very little SIAM experience, but a lot of Agile DevOps background, and some other people with a great SIAM and ITIL background and maybe slightly less aware of those. And somehow we managed to make a coherent content.
It is one of the questions that does seem to come up a lot is how does SIAM fit with a DevOps environment or more agile ways of working? And we did the global SIAM survey last year that was sponsored by Kinetic, and it did look in the data that came back that this was more something that people were thinking about rather than actually doing. There were less organizations actually reporting kind of specific experience with Agile and DevOps. What sort of things do organizations need to think about if they've maybe got a SIAM model, but they want to embrace more Agile and DevOps ways of working?
I think one of the risks of any SIAM model is to make it too restrictive. I always like to say it's not a contractual straitjacket. It's actually an environment that embraces collaboration, cooperation, and improvement. But particularly if you want to use Agile and DevOps, you're normally looking at self-managed teams with a clear scope, but also a lot of decision-making power. And that doesn't fit in the traditional hierarchies where decision-making rises to the top. So the service integrator needs to be involved in everything, and then the customer organization looking over the shoulder. That doesn't really work if you want to use that Agile DevOps kind of approach. So you can still have the service integrator in there, but you need to think about how that is going to work without slowing down your Agile and DevOps activities, but still retain the control and governance that you want.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, I think Simon's sort of alluded to it anyway. We decided to make this a specific section at the back of the book so that we could follow the whole roadmap journey for SIAM and start to bring in the key themes for DevOps and Agile in terms of, okay, so how would it impact at this stage? If we were starting with discovery and strategy with Agile teams, what would be the impacts in terms of their ways of working as opposed to the role of the service integrator and the governance framework? And we went all the way through that journey really to highlight those key areas. So what we think we've got is some really practical guidance, which answers many of the questions that we're asked about. You're quite right, Claire. Lots of people talk about Agile and DevOps and Lean and all of those principles, and there's more talk than there is actual application. But it's still quite an interesting one, because there are people who are doing snippets of those things, but they're also thinking about SIAM, and I think they're in their minds there's a sort of almost a juxtaposition between the two things. So we were really keen to make sure that we could bring some real life guidance into the bodies of knowledge, really to answer some of the questions that we're frequently asked.
So what's the implication for anybody who perhaps already has the SIAM qualification or has done some SIAM training? Because the bodies of knowledge have been around for a few years now. Any change like this has an impact on a wider ecosystem. So if somebody already has SIAM Foundation or SIAM Professional, do they need to recertify?
Well, the good news is no, they don't. So we want to. That's it. That's the short answer. We really want to make sure that we weren't contradicting anything that we've said before, unless it was absolutely necessary, and luckily it wasn't. So all the basic concepts in Foundation are still there. Like I said, some update on the other methodologies in there. So if you already have a SIAM Foundation accreditation, that will remain valid. You may want to read the new book, in particular with regards to the ITIL 4 Agile that we just alluded to, the new pieces, kind of, so to speak. With the professional, it's a little bit different, because there is new content that is quite different, but the professional was more about the application of it. So again, if you've achieved the professional accreditation, then you are still a SIAM professional that can apply things. Once again, you may want to read up on the new bits and get a feel for trust-based management, whether that suits you or not, or the new competency frameworks. But that's something you've got to do anyway. It's just that the books nicely bring it together in a SIAM context. So what will happen with the exams is that there's a transition period between April and July, where each training organization can choose whether to provide the old or the new exam based on whether they've updated the materials or not. And then after July, it'll be the new exam and the new box only. So that's just a transition period, but no one needs to do a transition training or exam. Everything's still valid.
That's good to hear. But definitely worth reading up on the new content, which is, I think, just what we should all be doing as service management practitioners anyway. There's always new things coming out that we need to be aware of. So I'm just going to pop a banner up there. So the second edition body of knowledge documents, they're going to be available on the 1st of April, which is a foolish day to do it. And you can download them for free from scopism.com. And if you have a look at the Scopism website, what you'll also see is there's a series of blogs that Michelle and Simon and some of the contributors to the updated bodies of knowledge that they've written in the run up to the release as well. So some updates from Michelle and Simon with a little bit more detail, and also some contributor blogs just going into some of the concepts in a bit more depth. So definitely worth having a look at those.
Yeah, because that was quite interesting, like trust-based management, for an example. There was literally almost a whole book written, not quite that much, but quite a lot. And as Michelle said, the professional is already such a big and heavy body of knowledge that we cut it down to the base concept, but the block will provide a lot more information to go with it. So it's a really good way to get the new book and then get even more information about a particular topic. Yeah,
I have to say that the trust-based management concept was one that I absolutely loved when I was reading the updates, because I think it's something that I've understood in my own mind but never really put any words around. But when you have these long relationships with organizations, how you interact with them is going to change. People change, relationships change, incidents happen, and this idea of trust as a kind of a line that's going up and down over time was just a brilliant one. I think was it Marcus who brought that one in?
Yeah, it was, Marcus. And then a few other people stepped into the fray, and we started to develop a framework around that, whereby, as you say, Claire, that is a moving feast. So, we can provider customer can have fantastic relationships, and provider to integrator can have a fantastic relationship at a point in time, but it only takes, a spoiled incident or an upgrade or something to happen. And it's about understanding how that relationship evolves and then applying different levels of management over that relationship. And as I say, seeing it as a bit of a journey, but the whole categorization of that, so you could almost put that in a pot. What do we look like right now? How happy are we with each other at this point in the time? And then what does that mean for the management of the relationship between the parties is a really, really powerful one. So yeah, the blog's great because obviously it sort of focuses a little bit more of the detail there. Simon's already said we couldn't put everything we wanted to into the book, so we had to be really, really careful. But our intention is to make sure that any of the other content that we feel is really valuable won't disappear. We will make it available via blogs as we carry on over the next sort of few months.
So it's been, I guess, pretty much 5 years between the first and the second edition of the Bodies of Knowledge. What do you think is next for SIAM? What's going to happen to SIAM in 2020? What's going to happen to SIAM beyond 2020 as well?
Gonna need my crystal ball for that.
Mystic Simon.
I think what happens, I hope more countries will kind of, standardize is the wrong word, but solidify that SIAM is a discipline, a practice that needs to be applied in an organization. It requires thinking, it requires different capabilities. And it's certainly something that we've seen in Australia. I know Michelle and I did a workshop at one of the conferences about that same period of 2015, and we had one person in the workshop who wasn't as positive as we would have liked it to be, and lo and behold, 3 years later, that person has come back with their organization going out for SIAM in a tender with kind of everything that the book tells them to do, and we see that certainly in Australia and some of the other countries that the survey showed, but a lot of countries are still kind of struggling with what is it? What do I need? How do I do it? And I really hope that SIAM as a discipline and the box as a particular way are gaining a lot more traction. That's my belief.
Yeah, I think supporting that. Although SIAM isn't new, and we always say that, it's been around for a long, long time, but it was the codification of the principles that sort of brought it really to life. But we are still finding that the different stakeholders within the SIAM ecosystem, the customer, the integrator, and the providers, are still not 100% sure on, well, what's my role? What's my responsibility? Where do I fit in? What accountabilities have I got to others, and so on? So, I guess what we're hoping is that we can grow that maturity. So I know certainly Simon and myself are trying to put together some additional guidance in that space as well, because we think there's plenty more to share. The other thing that I think would be, which I'd like to see, and I am seeing it talked about at least, is this idea of having service integration at an enterprise level, maybe in sort of non-IT environments, which is really interesting. And, we were talking about this aspirationally a few years ago, but we are starting to see it happen, which is really, really exciting as well.
Yeah, I think on the SIAM survey last year, there were, I think about 2/3 of organisations were applying SIAM to only IT services. The remainder had kind of a mix of SIAM for IT and non-IT services, but there was nobody, and this goes back a couple of years, there's still nobody using SIAM purely outside the IT arena. And my suspicion is that the activities are happening. It's not being called SIAM, and maybe that's not allowing organisations to take advantage of some of the lessons and the knowledge that's being shared in the community.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I'd like to think that things like the digital transformation or digital revolution, which is term that is abused a little bit, or even the release of ITIL 4, which is far less about IT and far more about real service delivery, are going to give that some more impetus of IT organizations, so to speak, to go to the business and say, hey, we can help with some of this business integration. That would be fantastic.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the other looking at things like take-up of SIAM education, where the body of knowledge is being downloaded. I think the other kind of key area is perhaps the USA. SIAM seems to be extremely strong in Europe, in Australia, in Asia, but for some reason doesn't have that traction in America.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I've asked a couple of colleagues in America about it, and not really got any definitive answers that I could share. But for me, we must all be experiencing the same challenges with complex multi-provider models. So it makes sense that that it would flow out over there. So I don't know. I think we've maybe got some work to do there. Quantifying or helping people to quantify that there is an issue that SIAM could potentially help with.
Mm. So just while we're wrapping up, I know you've got some travel plans later this year, coronavirus permitting. Tell us what you've got coming up and where people can see you and learn a little bit more about your work in the SIAM space.
Right now we're all over Australia, which is big enough in itself. But we are very much looking forward to going to Service North again in October this year. And as Michelle said, we are already doing some preparation about some stuff around the roles in the SIAM environment, and in particular customer organization. As a company, we have found some challenges with customers that are very keen to do SIAM and are almost handing over everything, say, well, you are the experts, you just go and do SIAM. When we have to go turn around and say, well, you still have a role to play in there. So hopefully towards the second half of this year, we will release some more guidance on that, and we will very gladly come and talk about that during Service North.
Excellent.
Yeah, and hopefully ITSMF Australia as well. Obviously not confirmed at this stage, too early on in the game, but we'll certainly be applying to speak about some of the things that we've been working on over the last few months, and so we'll be at those events as well.
Yeah, and I think it's just worth as well saying thank you to you both as well for the enormous efforts you've put into the SIAM bodies of knowledge. You've both got full-time jobs, and coordinating a global team of volunteers, I know it leads to some unsocial hours for conference calls and things, and it's a huge amount of extra work. So thank you very much for what you've done there for the SIAM community and for sharing that.
No problem. It helped with my hobby of herding cats.
So just a reminder then that those the second edition of the SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge and the SIAM Professional Body of Knowledge are going to be available via the Scopus website on the 1st of April. But between now and then, you can actually catch up on the blog, and there's quite a lot of content on there from Simon and Michelle going back some time, but there will be a series of blogs that's going live. It started in February, and it's just kind of giving you some more detail about those changes and what's coming up. And our next edition of the ITSM Crowd is on the 8th of April. So I have racked my brain and worked out the time zone. It's going to be 4 p.m. British summer time. The clocks will have changed by then. So that's going to be about Verism in action. So lots of people asking for some Verism early adopter stories. Can people share some of their experiences with Verism? So we're going to be joined by Steve Leach from 6.6 Cloud Gateway, David Barrow, who is a service management consultant, and Claire McAleese from Vocalink MasterCard. So they're all Verism early adopters. They're all going to be sharing a little bit more about their Verism journey. So really hope you can join us for that one. It's going to be a really, really interesting session. So thank you very much, Michelle and Simon, for joining us today. It's start of the working day for me, end of the working day for you, but really, really appreciate your time, and it's always lovely to see you. So thank you very much for that. And we will see everybody on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.